Hello, my name is Beth Dixon, and this is part 1 of a video series on frequency distribution. More specifically, I'm going to cover how to build classes when given the lower class limit of the first class and the class width. Thanks to Vicki Borlaug for the use of her PowerPoints on this video. The goal of this video is for the data set given to build classes given two pieces of information. First, the lower class limit, and then second, the class width desired. Now I will work through this example where parcels are weighed and their weights in pounds are listed below. This will be done in 2 steps. The first step in building classes is to be aware of the highest and lowest numbers in your data set. In our sets of weights, the highest weight or heaviest weight is 26.7 pounds, which can also be called the maximum number of our data set. The lowest weight is 11.6 pounds, which is the minimum number of our data set. Next, we can begin to build our classes given our 2 pieces of information. Build classes using a class width of 2.8 pounds and using 11.4 pounds for the lower class limit of the first class. Start with a structure for your classes, usually a table. Lower class limits are the lower numbers of each class. Notice that it tells us that the first lower class limit will start at 11.4. Is this a good place to start? Well, we like numbers that end in zeros and 5s because they're easy to add with, but it tells us where to start, and it is a good place to start because it is below or lower than the minimum data value. So we're following directions and it is below the number. The other key here is that it has the same number of decimal places as our data, which is also important. So we have all of the pieces of information to tell us that this is a good place to start. So we'll add that as our first lower class limit. Next, we need to create the rest of the lower class limits. Remember that each lower class limit is the same distance apart from previous lower class limits, and we call that distance between the lower class limits the class width. Our class width is 2.8, so add the class width of 2.8 pounds until you get a number higher than the maximum value or maximum data value. 11.4 plus 2.8 gives us 14.2. 14.2 plus 2.8 gives us 17.0. 17.0 plus 2.8 gives us 19.8. 19.8 plus 2.8 results in 22.6. 22.6 plus 2.8 will give us 25.4. 25.4 is not larger than 26.7, so again we'll still need to do one more class. 25.4 plus 2.8 gives us 28.2, which is larger than our maximum data value, so we can stop. We do not need to use the 28.2 to create a class, but it helps us to write it down so that we know that we've gone far enough. So cross out the last number because no data value is higher and the class will be empty. However, it is nice to see it as a reference even though it's not used for the answer. Now, the classes aren't complete with just lower class limits. They need upper class limits as well. To get those, we have two ways to fill the numbers into our table. First, remember that upper class limits, since the data has one decimal place, there is one decimal place between the classes. And each class has one decimal place less than where the next class begins. So if 14.2 is here as the beginning of the second class, the first class will be one decimal place less where it ends. So the first class will end at 14.1. If the third class begins at 17.0, then the previous class will end at 16.9. One decimal place less. Going to 19.8, the previous class will end at 19.7. Looking down to the next class, 22.6, the previous class will end at 22.5. Again, subtracting that one decimal place. Looking at 25.4, the previous class will end at 25.3. And this is where we'll reference that 28.2 that we're not using because it'll help us find that the previous class ended at 28.1. And even though we didn't use it, we did use it as that reference for that last upper class limit. Now we have all the classes. There is a second way to finish up the upper class limits involves using the class width more than the gap between the classes. You find that first upper class limit the same way. 14.2 and then take away 1/10 and get 14.1. But instead of using that gap for the rest of them, you can use the class width because the class width will be the same on both sides. You can use the class width of 2.8, 14.1 plus 2.8 to get the 16.9. 2.8 added to 16.9 gives me 19.7. 2.8 added to 19.7 gives me 22.5. Then add 2.8 to 22.5 and you get 25.3. Then adding 25.3 and 2.8, you will get 28.1, and we still have the same answers, just a different way. And whichever way makes best sense to you is the way that you should do it. Either way, we have completed the classes for our data set. Here are some exercises for you to build some classes, and that's for you to look at. I'm going to let you pause here if you would like and work them out on your own. If you would like to see these answers, you can contact me, and I would be glad to give you these answers. Here's a second exercise. Pause here to try this one. And here's a third example. And note, as you work, notice the difference in the number of decimal places. If you would like the answers again to these exercises, please contact me in the Mathematics Learning Lab or email me at beth.dixon@ws.edu. And I will gladly help you with these problems. Ms. Borlaug does use these as quiz examples, so I probably won't just give you the answers if you're in her class. I hope this example was helpful. Thank you.